while. Have a
Thank you
good
so much.
evening.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
The Student Activities Officer supports and develops engagement and inclusivity in extracurricular activities at the University of York, including societies, media, raising and giving, volunteering and other events. The Student Activities Officer represents more than 200 student groups to the university, lobbying for their interests and making sure that they receive the recognition that they deserve.
Hello everyone, I'm Izzie and I'm joined by Alex Thompson, who is running to be your Student Activities Officer this academic year. So Alex, nice and broad as always, why have you decided to run for the role?
Yeah, it's something I had to put a lot of time and effort into thinking about. I wasn't sure at first, but then I came to the conclusion that in my time at university, I've done so much in terms of events, societies and student media that I feel like I am very well equipped to deal with the role of activities officer. And it's also something that I care a lot about. And I didn't realize that. And then I started thinking and I realized how much I care about societies and media and events and how much they've given to me and how I'd love to give other people the opportunities that I've had.
So you've been quite an active member of BandSock, and you mentioned that quite a bit in your manifesto. Is that something which has inspired you to sort of make a difference to the running and the promotion of societies?
Yeah, 100% actually. That was kind of my first major leadership role, essentially. I didn't really think about that. I was prompted to run for it, ran for it, won, and I've loved it. I've really enjoyed the kind of day-to-day running of the society, whether it's, our online Battle of the Bands, which I'm running at the moment and is a lot of work, but an awful lot of fun. I feel like that's really prepared me for kind of going into this role in terms of leading a large society, putting on events, working, around the restrictions of COVID, whether it was, the events we had at the Forest last term, the COVID safe social distance gigs, or whether it's online events. I feel like that's put me in a really good position going into these elections.
So in terms of promoting events and giving societies exposure, I've been reading a little bit online about your idea of the virtual activities hub. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's a sort of idea I had because essentially with USU, it's really hard for societies to promote activities and they can often feel pretty unsupported because they don't want to promote it on social media, which is fair enough. But what you currently have is societies promoting their events and activities via their social media and via their mailing lists. And that's good, but you're only advertising to members and people with a base understanding that the society exists. So having everything centralized in an activities hub would kind of solve that problem. So it's kind of how I envision it is kind of imagine a Pinterest style web page with your different tiles, linking to the week's events, student media, volunteering, fundraising, all of those useful links. And that would be a really good way to put that all in one place so students can think, I wonder what's on, check the activities hub, and they'll find something there they'd like to attend.
So why do you think it's important to promote events and give these societies exposure?
It's the sort of thing, the more students get involved with events, I think it's just beneficial to their time at uni, whether it's just, their mental health, whether they just get just pure enjoyment out of it, or whether it's something they get inspired to, I don't know, go to a BandSock gig and start a band, or read a piece in news and decide they want to become a student journalist. I think that you can't understate the amount of opportunities that activities opens up. And the better promotion of these activities is better promoting the opportunities.
And how do you feel that USU can work better to put on these student-led events?
Yeah, so in my manifesto, I talk quite a lot about how I want a stronger dialogue between student groups and USU. And I think one great way to do that was this idea of events committees, where basically USU and myself, hopefully, would be there to kind of help people run events, whether that was college committees, societies, or even just student-led club nights on campus, for instance. If students feel comfortable going to USU and saying, look, we want to put on an event, but we don't know how to run it, or we don't know how to promote it, or we don't know where we want it, can you help us sort out security? That would be really important. And it's also something that's really interesting over the past year that's been raised is this idea of events and safe spaces, something which I feel a lot of people are talking about, but very few people know how to implement. So if these events committees could serve as a way for students to kind of come along and find out how they can better make their activities and their events safe spaces, that would be really beneficial.
So obviously activities have been, well, pretty massively interrupted this year by the pandemic. Do you think it's important for our societies to be supported in a post-COVID world?
100%. The last point of my manifesto focuses on this idea of leaving no one behind. And that's a really key idea because COVID is going to have left a massive dent on activities. You're going to get skill gaps mainly. When I think back to my time at News, the amount of time we spent training people on the software and and that sort of stuff, that's not been happening this year. So when the third years and fourth years graduate, there's going to be a massive load of students who don't know how to use that. So the idea would basically be that USU are there to kind of help societies repair these skill gaps by, offering training sessions or support, possibly financial support, but just being there to ensure that the societies maintain themselves strongly after the pandemic. Also, the idea that a lot of societies, very sadly, are going to be committeeless after this year because of the lack of members. And if a society is committeeless, it's de-ratified, it becomes dormant. And if another student wants to pick that society up, they have to go through this incredibly lengthy process of ratifying it, which is insane because it's already been ratified once. So basically, I'd like to propose this adopt an activity scheme. Mm-hmm. I feel like it would really streamline the process of re-ratifying these already ratified dormant societies. And it would also give students a lot more chance to create societies and create their own leadership opportunities and gain their own skills and knowledge and understanding through that.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you're quite heavily involved with the newspaper here at York. Do you feel as though it would be difficult to detach yourself when it comes to grant allocation for media groups, or is that something you feel like you'd be very fair with?
I think I was pretty attached to news in the first couple of years, and still it holds a place in my heart, but I've moved on, and going into this role, I love all the student media outlets at York. And I know we all have a little bit of banter every now and again, but I genuinely all think they are so valuable and they all provide a really essential role. So of course I would be able to detach myself from my previous roles in news and look fairly upon it, because I do think each and every student media outlet has a different function and deserve to be treated fairly.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you've mentioned quite a few points there that you're hoping to work on in the role. What's the most important thing to you that you want to work on?
I think the most important thing, well, the first most important thing is the Activities Hub and promotion, because that is kind of the centre of my idea. With that, you can promote the events, you can promote the activities. You can also have the links to the events forums and the activities forums that I've spoken about and taken from Ollie Martin. And that would kind of be a very centralised place to broadcast what I'm doing and to let students know what's going on and how they can get involved. So I think that's a really key point. And it's also something that would encourage and promote the ideas of safe spaces. It would provide the opportunities, things like access grants that students aren't necessarily aware of. I think that all stems from the Activities Hub.
And you've got quite involved with activities and societies yourself. So I'd be quite interested to know where the idea of the Activities Hub stemmed from.
Yeah, it stemmed from the past couple, months I've been doing BandSock, and it's really tricky sometimes to promote events, especially online. But usually you get the same people turning up, and that's lovely. And the people who come to BandSock gigs are some of my favourite people. Yeah. But it's how do we promote outside of those members? And the only people who come to BandSock gigs are people who follow the BandSock Instagram, essentially. So it would be the thing that I wanted to do was to give societies, events, volunteering, fundraising, all those incredible things, a platform outside of their social media, working alongside their own, society channels, but providing more exposure and getting more engagement with students.
And you talk about the dialogue that you wish to have between students and their activities officer. What are your plans for implementing that?
So the main plans would be the events committees, which I've already talked about, which would strengthen the dialogue between groups and USU, but also activities forums, which is something Ollie Martin brought in a couple of years back, but then they mysteriously vanished under the term of Brian Terry. And I think they were a really important show of good faith, essentially, in the sense that students could have their say and they could come along and they could hear what's going on and they could actively get involved. And I think that's a huge part of what the student union is. Because currently there's a great deal of apathy towards USU from students because they don't understand what it is and they don't know what it does. Whereas I think if they could have more of a say in it and there could be a stronger dialogue, then there would be some changing attitudes and students would be overall much happier.
That's amazing. So that's all we've got time for, but I'm going to pass to Matt Ward-Perkins now.
Lovely, thank you.
Student Activities Officer.